This week, I spoke to Tiffany, LaBruno and Geoffrey Lewis from Procore about how we can improve project efficiency and accountability within construction. I was thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to Tiffany and Geoff on the podcast, where they helped me deliver some key insights around the major trends in increased tech adoption and innovation, not just in GCs, but also owners and subcontractors, as the industry starts to become more networked. It is clear that construction world is starting to see the value in technology. My main takeaway from this episode centers around how the industry is finally realizing the value and how data can help drive powerful insights around capital planning in current and future construction projects. You should tune into this episode to hear more about Procore's partners like Bridget, UMT, 360, DocuSign, Building Transparency, who assist with making it a seamless, easy to use and sustainable platform. Once again, thank you so much for listening.
This is the Propcast, and I'm Louisa Dickins. Before we introduce our guest, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Are you looking for a space for women who make lasers and robots that break glass ceilings? I'm Antonia Soler, co-founder of Women in Construction Tech. If you're a founder, investor, or adopter who believes in advancing women in our industry, please join us at womeninconstructiontech.com.
Welcome to all our lovely listeners. I hope you're having a wonderful day or evening wherever you are listening in from. So on today's podcast, we have two of Procore's senior team joining us, and together we're going to be discussing how we can improve project efficiency and accountability within construction. So welcome to the show, Geoffrey Lewis, VP of Product Management, and Tiffany LaBruno, Product Director.
Great to be here. Thanks, Lou.
Thanks for having us, Lou.
I'm sure most of you listening in who are construction technology fans would have read or heard about Procore, maybe used them, I don't know. But for those who don't, Procore is the leading global provider of construction management software with over 1 million projects, more than $1 trillion USD in construction volume. I think those stats are up to date. If not, feel free to correct me. Geoff and Tiffany will share with us how Procore helps firms drastically increase project efficiency and accountability by streamlining and mobilizing project communications and documentation, which is a problem that is experienced by all the construction and real estate world. And this is why I guess construction starts, merging with fintech, as we've seen across various technologies in the built environment space at the moment. Now, this real-time data and accessibility minimizes costs, risks, and delays, ultimately boosting profits, which is what we all want, especially in a famously low-margin business. Now, they're going to talk through a bit about the M&A, the ever-changing product, price point versus value for customers, and the importance of collaboration with partners. So why don't we now hear from our guests? Geoff, do you want to start us through a little bit more, I guess, about your journey to this space? And for our audience also don't know, it'd be great if you share a little bit more about your involvement at Honest Buildings before the acquisition, and I guess how you oversee the financial product at Procore.
Absolutely. So I got into sort of PropTech and startups a little over a decade ago now. So previously I was in investment banking, did some technology investing at a private equity firm, and sort of got the itch to go actually work at a company versus just looking at all these different companies to invest in. So a buddy of mine and I started a startup, which was very ill-fated and failed fairly quickly, but that was a great experience because it really brought me much closer to the founder of Honest Buildings, a great guy named Riggs Kubiak. And so when my partner and I decided to shut down our startup, I went to have lunch with Riggs and said, "Hey, looking for a new job." And he said, "That's great. Started Honest Buildings." And so that was in 2013. We were about 7 people, really early days of PropTech in New York City, and saw a lot of growth. I was the head of product there for about 6 years before Procore acquired us in July 2019, and have now spent the last 4 years at Procore, and it's been a great ride. Obviously, anytime you work for a company that's based in Santa Barbara, California, that's always going to be a great experience, but Procore has been amazing. Procore basically, as you mentioned, is a construction management software. So think, managing schedules, managing blueprints, managing construction budgets and change orders and billings and all the different things that go on a site. That's what our product does. And I specifically look after our financial products, so budgeting, contract management, change orders, invoicing, and our new Procore Pay product. So that's me.
Thanks for that. Those listening in, like, it's obviously great working for business based out of Santa Barbara. But for poor Tiffany here, she's recording this podcast very early in the day, whereas me and Jeff are sort of leisurely sort of starting ours. Tiffany, for the audience who don't know you, you obviously have, a huge amount of experience in products that are going on to 20 years. You, oversee all the owners side of it. Can you share the audience, what does that mean, and how did you get into product as well, as a very sort of senior female lead in this space?
Well, it started off actually many years ago in the field. I worked in the field and found it, like literally in the construction project, and found that I had a penchant for technology. So I went to school and actually studied computer science and aligned the needs that construction owners have back to tech. So I worked as a consultant for many years, starting off with the Navy here in California, and spanning that for about 16 years with DoD, and then moving into an owner's rep that specialized in technology. So this company had their own technology department, and I was with the director of professional services. And what we did was we looked at all program controls or program management information systems and helped owners find the right one and help them install it, train them on it, and then showed them how to adopt it and keep learning with it. And Procore always was one of my favorites. And I loved it because it was wonderful to use on site. The mobile capabilities were great. It was easy to train. People retained it. People wanted to use it. But it years ago didn't have everything that owners needed. So I saw it starting to evolve into the owner space, and I was really excited to become part of it. So about a year and a half ago, I joined, and I've been helping really roll out this strategy they've had in for about 3 or 4 years for owners. And it goes across. So I'm a director of product for owners, so I go across all of product and technology, really helping to refine and support the perspective for owners and having them really get value out of Procore and how they use it, primarily through financials, but also through the project management, quality, safety, analytics, etc.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Could I just dig a little bit deep into, obviously you went from being in the field back into studying and looking at sort of, I guess, technology and sort of data. Why did you make this move? Because I think this is my previous podcast, which I did, was about how can we upskill and get more people into the construction technology space. But no one really talks about why they do it, what's exciting, what are the exciting opportunities and how to do it. But what sort of made you make that transition, other than Procore, obviously?
Well, as we know, construction is the second least productive industry in the world, right? I think farming was number one and construction was number two. So we really have seen over the last 20, 30 years that I've been in this industry, an evolution to utilize technology within construction. So at the time, when I decided to make the switch, it really was because we were starting to use things like Excel, and we were starting to use these older, I think there's these tools out there called Expedition. Some of you who are my age will remember that. But that was one of the very first tools that we used. And I was really excited to see project managers and people who were maybe even construction managers or field personnel who weren't necessarily ready to adopt really grasp it and love it and want to use it more. So I think that's what inspired me. And I started finding myself training people to use tools better. This is how you could manage your budget within Excel. And these are some things that I found work best, right? And then as we evolved in the industry and there became more and more tools to support it, then obviously my repertoire grew. But it really just started out watching people adopt and really liking to see them grow within that space.
Thank you for sharing that. So obviously a big topic of this podcast is obviously the space growing, but for it to sort of evolve, we need obviously people from adjacent industries, different sort of backgrounds, everything like that to plug the talent gap. You've obviously both been in the construction technology space for some time. Are there any sort of key trends, observations you've seen in terms of product development and growth of innovation within this space? I don't know if you can look at it sort of from a macro and sort of micro level. Jeff, maybe this one can be for you.
Well, I think Procore, I think we just had our 20th anniversary. I think we were founded in the early 2000s. And for the first, call it 15 years of our life, it was all general contractors, right? That was where the technology adoption was. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting over really the past 5 years is seeing owners really come into the space and start saying, hey, we need technology. We're the ones who spend all the money on these construction projects. How do we manage them? So that's been a really interesting shift. And I think we're just really scratching the surface on that. And, at the same time, we've also seen subcontractors who maybe have been invited into their general contractors Procore account and are seeing how general contractors can be much more efficient in managing all the different things they have to do and saying, hey, we should probably do this too. That would really help our profit margins. So I think that's been a really exciting thing just to see this really networked industry, right? No construction project gets done by one company alone. It's owners who work with architects and engineers and general contractors and loads of subcontractors all working together to actually deliver something. And so I think over the past 5 years, we've really seen that desire for everybody in construction to start using software really grow and grow and grow. And I think what the challenge then becomes is how do you make it super easy for them to adopt, right? If they're sort of laggards to pick up technology at all, if they get in there and it's too hard to use or too hard to configure, they're just going to throw up their hands and go back to Excel. And so I think that's kind of where we're focused, right? Is how can we make something that's really usable and efficient, but also very just easy, natural, not dissimilar to what you'd use in your regular life to, book an airline ticket, right? So those are, I think sort of the ways we're thinking about the changing landscape in construction.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Tiffany, is there anything you'd like to sort of build upon with that one?
No, I think just in terms of technology growing and changing, there's so many things we're seeing and that we're utilizing at Procore in terms of like AI and ML and really driving data insights to owners. They're starting to see the value of utilizing it across the platform because then they can make decisions on future projects based on how the last project went. How much did we spend in this region? What were material costs? What was delivery time? What are the resources available to us here and there? And so being able to capture all that data and then push it back to them that way, I think is probably, as we know, data is just growing and growing, and the adoption of it and the use of it and the ways we use it differently. I think just having owners leverage that is really great.
Obviously, last year we saw, I think, according to Crunchbase, in 2021, there was 125 acquisitions and an increase. That's in 2021, and an increase to 151 acquisitions in 2022. Those listening in who want to correct me, go for it. I took off Crunchbase. I'm sorry if it's incorrect. And we're expecting going into, I guess, 2023, there's going to be a further increase. Obviously, valuations dropping and some pretty good deals out there and just development of this space. Jeff, you obviously mentioned you were involved in the acquisition of Honest Buildings. Can you share with the audience, how did this come about? What was the merger like? What did it mean for the business? What was the benefit? Because I think there's a lot of some founders listening in here who would love to go for an acquisition, but how can you kind of set yourself up for it and what's it actually like to be part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm not surprised there's been a big increase in M&A. I just remember, as I mentioned, when I joined Honest Buildings in 2013, there were so few real estate technology startups. I feel like there were 5 in New York City and they all knew each other. We'd go to VTS and Hightower's offices for drinks and invite people from the other real estate tech companies. So I think just the amount of venture flowing into the space means there's a lot more companies, and a lot more companies who are building good products with good teams means a lot more good acquisition targets for companies like Procore. In terms of the Honest Buildings acquisition, we sort of built a relationship with Procore over a series of years. I think probably 2016 was the first time that we met this guy named Tui, who came into our office in New York City and just wanted to learn a little bit more about what Honest Buildings was doing. So he built a really good relationship with Riggs, our founder, and I'd built some relationships over there. So I think probably the one thing I would say for founders out there is that companies are bought, not sold, really. Procore's got to really want to purchase Honest Buildings. You can't just go to them and say, "Hey, we're for sale." That's not going to be something that gets a deal done. And I think it really is important that when you're combining two entities like this, the people fit really matters. So I think that's one thing I would say. It's like, you're so busy building a business, it can be really hard to think about building relationships with execs from bigger companies who you might think of as competitors, honestly, but ultimately making a little bit of time to just consistently build those relationships can really pay dividends if ultimately you want your company to get acquired down the line. And so, and specifically Procore's idea was, I had mentioned that Procore had really been this general contractor focused company. TUI's vision was way bigger than just serving one stakeholder, general contractors. How can we get into owners and Honest Buildings? Because we'd had so much traction with owners like Brookfield and Hines and WeWork and other types of folks who were just doing tons and tons of construction. It felt like a natural fit to sort of accelerate what Procore was doing in the owner space. So that's really how it came about. And obviously 4 years later, I'm still here and loving life at Procore. So I think it's been a beautiful thing. And obviously we've hired people way more qualified than me and Riggs in the form of Tiffany to come in and run our owners business. So, it's been a great thing. Not every M&A deal goes great. I think there's lots of horror stories about things, but, it feels like this has been one that maybe goes against the grain.
Great. Well, look, I'm looking forward to seeing further growth, success, and maybe a few more acquisitions on the horizon. Who knows? Watch this space, everyone. Now, obviously, construction is known for being a low margin business with prime contractors running at about a 2% gross margin. And this means, as obviously Jeff mentioned TUI earlier, he once said that you're always one decision away from risking the business of going bankrupt, especially when the cost of materials is going up every year. There's no margin for error. Procore is not a low cost product. Now, you don't see many founders sort of announcing that. But there's obviously some huge value here. Watching your, I guess, the rate of the adoption of the product go, this scaling. So, Tiffany, how does your product provide true value to customers? I guess get around the cost of it. What are the questions your customers are asking? Do you ever get pushbacks on price point?
I think because owners utilize it differently to a certain degree, Procore is one of the tools in their tech stack, where a contractor, Procore is probably one of a few, because the cost of a building, 20% of a cost of a building is construction, 80% is operations and maintenance. So owners have this suite of tools that they use to maintain that building, not just construct it. So we have to really provide value in how they utilize Procore so that, again, they can get more of those insights on the next project they build, right? So how are we informing them in their utilization of that data for the next project so that they find value in it? So that's really of the utmost importance. I think in terms of pushback, they're really evaluating Procore against other products that they use. Can it do the same things as the products I have today? And no, it's very unique because it tracks that piece of execution that they need for that history of how that thing was installed, how was it procured, what was the lead time on the order, how, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, no, as long as we continue to provide value, I don't know that we have as much pushback because of the uniqueness in what Procore provides. But Jeff, you've been here longer than I have, so you probably know a little bit more if that's the case.
Yeah, no, that was great, Tiffany. And I would just also add that, especially owners, they don't have big budgets for construction software. There's no line item in their annual budget that's saying, hey, here's where I'm going to go buy a bunch of software effectively. So you really have to prove the case to them that by purchasing this software, they're going to save all that money and then some somewhere else. And so I think that's been a really educational challenge for us, right? How do you train the industry to think that way, where, you know, in 5-10 years, you go to a job site and they're not using Procore and you're like, what the heck? Why would you ever do it this way? You know, and sort of help paint the picture of how you can be so much more efficient and ultimately improve your bottom line by using software. I think the one thing that's also been interesting in dealing with owners versus dealing with general contractors is that if a project goes over budget, the general contractor doesn't really care. If anything, they might make more money. But the owner cares, right? If you thought the project was going to cost $100 million and now it costs 105, well, who cares?
Yeah, that 1% difference increase actually is a lot of money in big projects.
Yeah, that's right. So I think those are also the things too, where historically the tools have been built for these general contractors who are doing all the work and very much need software, obviously. But the owners who are holding all the risk, I think, haven't necessarily availed themselves with the right tools to be able to really effectively manage that risk, whether that's showing all my projects, figuring out which ones are the most at risk currently, and I can go spend my time there, or to Tiffany's point, learning from your past projects so that you can better underwrite your future projects. Maybe 100 was always wrong and it always should have been 105, but you didn't know that because you didn't have the right data to think about that. So those are some of the things we've seen with owners. And I think for the folks who get it and then adopt it, we've seen massive gains. So the hope is that as more and more owners become used to that, then that just becomes the market standard.
Are there any, you mentioned some names obviously earlier, like Brickfield and Highs. Are there any other like case studies? I saw obviously a few online about BT, Oxford Properties and so forth. Are there any case studies you can share with us with like customers being, super happy?
We have a lot of customers in different spaces other than development as well. Retail, Whole Foods, retail, renewables like NG, Boston Children's Hospital comes to mind as one of the case studies we did. And actually, I think we're releasing one soon for Vantage Data Centers, who is the poster child for a lot of the things that I just mentioned, in terms of being able to really plan ahead and leverage the data that they're pulling out of Procore in terms of like their supply chain disruption, predicting material costs. They're actually looking at the region that they're about to build in and doing that research ahead of time and utilizing a lot of the data from past projects of theirs or Procore data that they have to say, this is how we're going to structure or plan this next build. So it's really informing a lot of the capital planning that they're doing, which I think is a great case study.
Absolutely. I also have a couple of questions of some partnerships which you have. I can see you collaborated with a few other construction technologies, one being a UK one with Bridget. We've got lovely, I think, is it Brittany there, and Jade. How does this add value to your customers? I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about this collaboration or maybe another one which you've done.
So I think the goal with the partnerships with other software providers is really to create a slick experience so that customers who are using Procore don't have to click around to a million different tabs to get their job done, right? Everything is sort of in one place, but that doesn't mean Procore is going to do everything better than other people do it. And by creating this open ecosystem, the idea is maybe Procore can be the control center for where you manage your construction projects, but all the other things you need to do, you can plug into Procore in a really seamless way. And so what's interesting is actually a lot of our most used integrations are things that are used across every industry, not just construction. So think DocuSign for electronic signature, Microsoft Outlook, Power BI, just some of the basic business tools that every company has. And so we've done a lot of integrations with those, and they just make the product much, much better and more usable. And it's so much smarter for us to leverage DocuSign versus trying to go recreate our own e-signature technology. We'd much rather spend our time focused on construction stuff that we can do effectively, right? So that's been great. And I think, we talked before about how there's just been this massive influx of capital and talent and new ideas into the construction tech space. We're also seeing a lot of traction with partners who are building specifically for construction, and they are coming to Procore to partner with us to deliver certain pieces of functionality that our customers need. So for example, Tiffany mentioned capital planning. Well, Procore is very good for managing a project once it's underway. If you want to really look scenario wise at all the different things you could do in the future, we're not built for that, but we have partners like UMT 360 who are, right? And so that becomes a really natural partnership for us. Customers can then get everything they need by having these softwares connected to each other in a way that makes a lot of sense. So we've seen a ton of value from that, and are going to continue to do that.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I was just looking up a UMT software enterprise portfolio management product. Thank you for sharing that. Audience, definitely check it out. If Procore's using it, it's probably worthwhile having a look yourself. Now, Tiffany and Jeff, there's also been another collaboration, another product, and it's around obviously ESG. You announced about a year ago the integration of embodied carbon in construction calculator, which to drive its sustainability across the construction industry globally. But how does that work with sort of Procore? There's obviously another integration. What does that sort of mean for you and your customers?
Procore has put a lot of investment into the pre-construction space in the last year, especially. So around bidding and estimating primarily, and doing takeoffs, and really looking at how we create a linear path for owners from their design through their estimate, through their budget, right? So as you adjust your design, your estimate and your budget can also adjust. And so the partnership with, and also obviously being very ESG focused at the same time, right? So we're starting to look at what partners can provide value within that pre-construction space. And one of them was a partnership that we created with Building Transparency, which has a free product called EC3. So the integration right now actually pushes estimating data from Procore into EC3 and enables you to decide what materials you can use predictively on a project in order to determine the embodied carbon of the project overall. And that includes transportation of the material. So it has some really great features in the sense that you can say, okay, this is the takeoff. I'm going to push that estimate into EC3. It will say, these are the materials you've chosen to date. This is the embodied carbon. Would you like to adjust the materials? You can look at other similar materials and decide if you'd like to switch one out. And then that will tell you what the new carbon footprint would be on that particular project. So that's just the beginning of some of the things we're doing in the ESG space. I think you should keep an eye on that because there's going to be a lot more there.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Tiffany. Conscious of time, and before we go into the very brief LMRE questions, would any of you like to share? Obviously, Tiffany shared a little bit more about the ESG part of Procore. Is there anything else our audience can expect, or what we should be watching out for in terms of Procore's sort of expansion? Obviously, you're pretty global now. Jeff, is there anything you can share about audience?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, we did get our start, obviously, in the U.S., based out of California. But at this point, we're a very global company. I mean, we've got offices all over the world, London, EMEA, Middle East, Singapore, Australia. So we've really been expanding. And the cool thing is that, the U.S. is just a small fraction of global construction. Right. It's everywhere. It affects everybody. And so we're really excited to continue to really plant our flag and expand globally so that we can help serve construction in every country that it's occurring across the country. So really excited about that. Obviously, entering new markets is difficult. And so, we have to be very choosy about which markets we go into next. But it's been really great. And I think one of the things we've also learned is that in many ways, folks in countries outside of the U.S. are often even more forward thinking about how they do construction, different, more agile delivery methods, different ways to get buildings done in a more collaborative manner. So we're really excited to sort of learn what folks do globally and try to raise the bar for the way the world does construction.
Thank you so much for that. So now we've come to the end of this show. How we finished, Jeff and Tiffany, we finished with the LMRE part. So L was touched upon a main lesson you've learned in your career. M is if you'd like to mention anyone, it could be a product or service, give it a shout out. R is what's been the most rewarding part of working in the construction technology space? And E is what are you most excited about? So we'll do it one by one. So Tiffany, could you share with us? I'm sure you've had many lessons in your career, but is there one that sort of sticks out for you that you could share with the audience?
I think over time, being a consultant for many years and then being a product owner and product manager is really just to listen, because our customers are the source of all of that information for us and we learn from them. So really just listening to what they need, making sure that we're aligned with that and providing value for them is number one on my list.
Awesome. Thank you for that. In my first job interview after university, I asked them what's the best bit of advice you can give you for my career. And the guy said the most important thing you can never do is listen. I don't know if that was some constructive criticism after the interview, but I have always carried that with me as well. um, Jeff, what about you? So for who would you like to give a mention to? It could be someone, it could be a part of the business, it could be another partner of yours, down to you.
Well, I think, I mentioned that obviously Honest Buildings was a really formative and important part of my career. So I just want to give a huge shout out to Riggs, who was the CEO and founder of Honest Buildings, who really gave me a shot. I really had no business being a product leader for any company, even an 8-person company at that time. But he gave me a shot, and obviously it worked out, and the rest is history, as they say. But I think so much of life is luck and timing, and it's important to reflect on times when frankly I just got lucky, and Riggs was a huge huge foundation for me in my career.
I'm sure he would argue that he was the one that got lucky. But thank you for sharing that. Right, Tiffany, back to you. What's been the most rewarding part of working in the innovation space of construction?
I think it goes back to the whole reason why I started. Honestly, I love watching people's faces, especially when you have this curmudgeon or someone that's really just completely resistant to utilizing something new, and watching them evolve into an evangelist for whatever they're, have you seen this new iPhone? I had a clamshell for 20 years. And now that, has anyone else seen this thing? So I love when they kind of shift over, watching people evolve into tech. I think I'm just such a huge fan of technology and innovation and adoption. So getting more people on the bandwagon, I love that.
Thank you. Right, Jeff, last and not least, what are you most excited about for the future of construction technology?
I am really excited to see how much things change over the next 20 years. It's really interesting. Procore is obviously a big, successful company, right? But the reality is, I feel like we're probably in the second or third inning. That's a baseball reference. That's what we do over here in the U.S. But I just feel like we're very early on in the game, and it's just hard to believe how much change there will need to be in construction. And I think there's so much more to do. Tiffany mentioned that construction is the second least productive industry in the world, and we can do way better. And so I'm really excited to sort of see how all this technology comes together and we start to really change things over the next 20 years.
Well, look, Tiffany and Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. I'll obviously be catching up with you after the show. Those who don't know what NEOM is, and it's just me and Tiffany who are like obsessed with it. Imagine a city with no roads, cars, or emissions that's run 100% off renewable energy, and 95% of land will be preserved for nature. So that's kind of what it's going to be. It's going to be a whole new world, but they're going to be using so much technology within that. So check that out as well. And obviously check out Procore online. We'll be sharing the details. And yet again, thank you to our guests for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Making a high-quality podcast like this one takes a lot of work. That's a fact. But not when you hire a podcast company. With our white glove experience, we handle everything for you. From guest outreach all the way through to publishing and promotion, we handle it all. You show up to hold great interviews and build relationships with your guests, and we take care of everything else. Podcasting is not just about the audience. Every podcast interview is the start of a new relationship. With a weekly podcast, you'd build relationships with 52 ideal partners or prospects through your podcast interviews over the next 12 months. Do you believe that 52 new relationships would help grow your business? We do. Contact Jason at apodcastcompany.com and let's talk.